Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
George and a few other people sent me this story about General Motors getting in trouble with the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. So this story I'm going to tell you about is directly from a press release issued by the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC takes action against GM for sharing driver precise location and driving behavior data without consent. So if you're driving a modern car these days, it knows all kinds of stuff because it's smart. And it knows where you are and where you've been and how you're driving. And so it turns out that data is extremely valuable to other people. People want to market things to you, or perhaps insurance companies want to study how you drive. So, under the proposed order, GM and OnStar will be banned for 5 years from disclosing geolocation and driver behavior data to consumer reporting agencies. Now, you might say, but Steve, after 5 years they can start again? Well, after 5 years, they're supposed to follow the rules more closely. So we'll get into that. The FTC is taking action against GM and OnStar over allegations they collected, used, and sold drivers' precise geolocation data and driving behavior information from millions of vehicles without adequately notifying consumers and obtaining their affirmative consent. So under the proposed order, which settles the allegations, General Motors Holding, and OnStar LLC, which are owned by General Motors, will be banned for 5 years from disclosing consumers' sensitive geolocation and driver behavior data to consumer reporting agencies. They also must take other steps to provide greater transparency and choice to consumers over the collection, use, and disclosure of their connected vehicle data. This is the FTC's first action related to connected vehicle data. Now, in their complaint, the FTC alleged that General Motors used a misleading enrollment process to get consumers to sign up for its OnStar connected vehicle service and the OnStar Smart Driver feature. GM failed to clearly disclose that it collected consumers' precise geolocation and driving behavior data and sold it to third parties, including consumer reporting agencies, without consumers' consent. So you're just driving along, and the way you're driving is being recorded and sold to somebody and is going to affect, your credit score? I mean, consumer reporting agencies. It's more likely going to affect your insurance rates. But GM monitored and sold people's precise geolocation data and driver behavior information, sometimes as often as every 3 seconds. With this action, the FTC is safeguarding Americans' privacy and protecting people from unchecked surveillance. Now, I've mentioned before, I recently bought a new Ford Explorer, and it was replacing a Ford Explorer that was about 5 years old. And the old Ford Explorer had a built-in mapping software system, okay? And when I bought my new Ford Explorer, they said, that Ford doesn't do that anymore. Ford says that you just plug your phone in and use an app off your phone. And at the time, my first thought was, okay, that's going to be one extra step for me. But then I thought, but that also means that Ford can't track me anymore, at least not using that mapping software. GM has offered OnStar as a service that will aid consumers during an emergency and provide hands-free voice assistance and real-time traffic and navigation. Over time, the company has increased the amount of data it collects through OnStar to include precise geolocation data collected every 3 seconds for some users. Now, I can tell you that there was a time, this is over 10 years ago, where I had a brand new General Motors car, and I never turned the OnStar on until one day I'm driving along and all of a sudden a voice enters the cabin and says, "Hello, this is OnStar." And I'm like, what? And it freaked me out. And an operator / salesperson had noticed that there was this car up in Michigan, got sold a few months ago, and the user never fired up the OnStar. So I'm driving into work, and this woman's explaining to me about how I should turn it on and what it does for me, blah, 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 blah. And by the time I got to where I was going, the OnStar had been turned on. And by the way, I never used it. So the net result was they got to track me for a few years, but I never used it. And then the weird part is that as we were talking and I'm driving, I'm sure that she probably read me a bunch of disclaimers that I, overrode, said, fine, go ahead and do it. But how thorough could those disclosures have been if there's something being read to me over the air as I'm driving to work? Tracking and collecting geolocation data can be extremely privacy invasive, revealing some of the most intimate details about a person's life, such as whether they visited a hospital or medical facilities, or what you do in your daily routine. When consumers bought a GM vehicle, they were encouraged to sign up for OnStar and its smart driver feature, which they were often told would be used to help them assess their driving habits. The FTC's allegation is that General Motors' enrollment process for the data collection was confusing and misleading. In fact, some consumers were unaware that they had been signed up for the smart driver feature, according to the complaint. In addition, GM failed to clearly disclose to consumers the types of information it collected through its smart driver feature, including geolocation data and driver behavior that would be sold to consumer reporting agencies. So, for instance, instances of hard braking. Oh, this guy hit his brakes too hard one time. He was driving late at night. Oh, he was speeding. These consumer reporting agencies used the sensitive information that GM provided to compile credit reports. You thought I was joking. Which were used by insurance companies to deny insurance and set rates. Many consumers were unaware of these practices and complained to GM after finding out that their driving habits were being used by insurance companies to set their rates. For example, one consumer told a GM customer service rep that when I signed up for this, it was so OnStar could track me. They said nothing about reporting it to a third party, nothing. You guys are affecting our bottom line. I pay you, now you're making me pay more my insurance company. So think about that, and that is a problem. And I believe that there's going to come a time where consumers are going to demand there be legislation that says that if a device is tracking you, that they have to disclose that up front and they have to get your affirmative permission to sell the data to anybody. Because don't get me wrong, I understand that if I have a smartphone and the smartphone is telling me where I am, it must know where I am. I mean, I understand that. But for the company that's running the app to take the data from that and sell it to somebody else without a clear disclosure to me that that's what's happening, that is wrong. That is wrong. And number one, if you said, Steve, can we sell your data? I'd say, no, of course not. I'd say, no, you can't do that. On the other hand, it's creepy. It's creepy that they're tracking you and selling the data. But the weirder part is that this consumer found out. And the consumers will find out sometimes because you have a perfect driving record, as far as you know, and your rates jump. Some states require insurance companies to notify you why your rates increased. And they say, we increased your rates because of your driving habits. You go, I got a clean driving record. They say, I know, but we've found this data that your vehicle sold to us. Well, General Motors sold it, but your vehicle gathered it. And it says here that occasionally you speed and you hit your brakes too hard. What data is that now? The data that we got from General Motors that they took off the car. And so we're raising your rates. The proposed order would prohibit GM and OnStar from misrepresenting information about how they collect, use, and share consumer location and driver behavior data. Additional provisions of the proposed order require GM and OnStar also to not disclose covered driver data to consumer reporting agencies. They're required to obtain consent prior to collection. They're required to allow consumers to obtain and delete their data. And they're required to allow consumers to limit data collection from their vehicles. So what this reminds me of is about 30 years ago when credit reports first became something people talked about in the public sphere. People would hear and say, wait, there's 3 credit reporting agencies and they can say something bad about me and I won't get a credit card, for instance. And so they had to pass a bunch of laws to get transparency in that field. And they finally wound up with laws that say that, you know, you've got the right to see your credit report every so often. If you see something in it, you're allowed to dispute it. If you dispute it, they came up with laws to protect consumers in these situations. And they're going to need to come up with laws like these right here and apply them to everybody who's collecting and selling your data. And they need to put teeth in those laws to say that if they collect your data and do something wrong with it, or they do it without your permission, that you should be able to go after them. So they should also allow consumers to limit the data collection from their vehicles. The companies must also give consumers the ability to disable the collection of precise geolocation data from their vehicles if their vehicle has the necessary technology, and provide a way for consumers to opt out of the collection of geolocation and driver behavior data, with some limited exceptions. During a closed meeting, the Commission voted 302 to accept the proposed consent agreement. Now, normally, when you have 302 in a win-loss record, the third column is ties. So 3 wins, 0 losses, 2 ties. Here, I believe they're absent voters, or they abstained from voting. So out of 5 possible votes, 3 voted in favor and 2 didn't vote. The FTC will publish a description of the consent agreement package in the Federal Register soon. The agreement will be subject to public comment for 30 days after that, and then the Commission will decide whether to make the proposed consent order final. Instructions for filing comments will appear in the published notice. Once processed, comments will also be posted on regulations.gov. So you have to understand that what happened here was the FTC filed a complaint against General Motors and said, here's what we think you're doing, and we think you need to stop. GM could have said, we disagree, we'll see you in court. But instead, they said, okay, we'll work out a settlement. And they worked out a settlement where they're going to agree to this, but the settlement was put in the form of a consent decree, which means both parties have agreed to enter into this agreement that will be then sent to a court, and the court will enter it, and it becomes like a legal document, much like a judgment, okay? And because they've done it that way, it's public, and it can be overseen and enforced by the court. So this is pretty cool, but right now, it turns out that pretty much everything is tracking you. Okay, everything is tracking you. Your phone's tracking you, your refrigerator's tracking you, your toaster is probably tracking you also, okay? And they need to pass laws that say devices that gather information about you, the people who run those can't gather that data without telling you, and they can't sell it without your permission. They need that to be written into the law. And it needs to be enforced. It needs to have teeth. And by that, I mean it needs to have a part that says a consumer can file a lawsuit over it, and if they win, they get their attorney fees paid. Because without that, who's going to file the lawsuit? You know, some company's selling your data. You're going to sue them? Okay, if you got to go hire your own attorney, most people wouldn't do it. So class action, maybe. But as we know, class actions tend to fizzle out with respect to good results for all the consumers. So it's an interesting story. It's a great result. I just need this to go further, and I need it to become something that we need a massive shift in how this is being handled. And so these companies need to, I think by law, I think we need a law that says this, tell us what they're gathering about us and give us the opportunity to opt out. And also, they're selling our data to tell us that also, and give us the opportunity to opt out. That's what I think. So Greg and everybody else, thanks for sending that. George also, Federal Trade Commission provided this to me. The FTC takes action against General Motors for sharing drivers' precise location and driving behavior data without consent. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. One can never know for sure what a deserted area looks like.